We are hearing stories that the healthcare system, not just in terms of the ambulances, but ICUs, oxygen shortages, vaccination shortages, you name it, everything, treatment is just nowhere close to the scale of the epidemic crashing around you right now. Talk about what you're seeing in hospitals across your country right now.
So the people that my heart really goes out to, apart from, of course, the desolate families that are running from hospital to hospital looking for help, is the doctors and the health workers who have been totally betrayed by the absence of logistical backup and infrastructure, who have been totally betrayed by a complacent, callous, and incompetent preparation for this second wave. The health workers are being blamed by angry families when there is no bed or when there is no oxygen or when somebody dies. We've had hospitals in the national capital of India where in a single night, 25 patients have died in a premier hospital because there was no oxygen. And this has happened not once, it's happened 3 times this past week alone. And so you see your health system collapsing, but not because your frontline workers aren't doing what they're meant to, but because policymakers, the government, basically dropped the ball on the second wave. There was a misreading that the worst was behind us when the first wave was over. India decided to gift away or export vaccines. We purchased very few vaccines for ourselves. We were hung up on a made in India vaccine, so we did not give approvals to foreign made vaccines, all of which we've had to do now in the midst of this calamity. We're supposed to have a major vaccine rollout for everyone above 18, but there are no vaccines that are going to power that rollout, or not enough anyway. And through this period of carnage, we've had our politicians, including our Prime Minister and our Home Minister and our major opposition leaders, continue to address political rallies that have seen crowds in the hundreds of thousands and not intervened to have stopped religious congregations that have taken place in the heartland. If this is not mixed messaging, if this is not callousness, if this is not insensitivity, I do not know what is.
Talk to me about the mood. Talk to me about how it feels to be an Indian citizen in that environment.
It feels like citizens have been left to fend for themselves. It's almost sort of Darwinian. You have a sense of being starring in your own worst science fiction survivor movie, where it's up to you. If you survive, it's because you managed to somehow. It's because of who you knew or how tough you were, not because the institutions of the state are necessarily available equally for all. In Hindi, one man said to me at a cremation ground, and I'll translate it in English, he said, "Hum Bhagwan bharose hain," which means we are now in God's hands. Basically, what he was conveying was that there was no state representation to turn to, whether at the doors of hospitals or at burial grounds or graveyards or cremation grounds. There's a great sense of loneliness, of desperation, of despair. I would call it a heartbroken nation, but I would also call it an angry nation. My social network timelines are filled with plaintive pleas for an oxygen concentrator, for an oxygen cylinder, for an ICU bed. And people have even stopped tagging official handles. Civil society is just tagging each other. It's almost like people are, it's now up to us to save ourselves. That's how I'd emotionally describe it. If I were to step back and be a little more clinical about it, I'd say the government has finally hit the emergency buttons. I think now they are describing it as a once-in-a-century crisis. But a once-in-a-century crisis, if you lose 2 months, as we have, in critically not purchasing those vaccines, in continuing to hold mammoth mass congregations, those 2 months is the difference between many, many lives, Ian, lost and saved. And the other fear that we have in this country is that we may not even fully count our dead. I say this to you as someone who has traveled across states to multiple funeral grounds. And when I compare the numbers of funeral pyres lit or burials that are taking place to the official data as released from those districts or those provinces or those states that day, the gap is humongous. So the official numbers are bad, but I can tell you that in fact, in actuality, the numbers of those dying is so much worse.